"Get in my carriage, now." The words rang out like a thunderclap, sharp and unyielding against the howling wind. In the muddy streets of Redstone Creek, Montana, 1878, Clara Hensley stood tall in the pouring rain, her black cloak snapping, like a war flag, her green eyes locked onto Jonah Tate, a man the town had all but buried, his 2 daughters clinging to his legs, soaked to the bone. She wasn't asking, she was demanding, and in Redstone Creek, where strangers were as welcome as a winter frost, that kind of boldness stopped hearts. Redstone Creek sat in a rugged Montana valley, flanked by mountains that loomed like silent sentinels. It was a town where hope came to rust, where dreams were ground into the dirt under heavy boots. Jonah Tate knew that better than anyone. 3 years ago, he'd been the heart of this place, a blacksmith whose forge lit up the night, whose laughter filled a small cabin where his wife, Leela, sang lullabies to their daughters, Maisie and Nora. But smallpox stole Leela, and a crooked deal with banker Silas Morrow stole everything else: his forge, his land, his pride. Now, Jonah was a shadow, scavenging scraps to keep his girls alive while the town whispered, "Poor Jonah, cursed man, don't get too close." Clara Hensley was different. She'd rolled into Redstone that morning, her polished black carriage gleaming like a jewel against the gray, churned-up streets. A mail-order bride from Boston, she'd come to marry Amos Reed, a rancher with a decent spread and a decent name. But Amos was dead-kicked by a wild stallion, buried 2 days before she stepped off the stagecoach. Most women would have fled, clutching their trunks and their tears. Not Clara. She'd left Boston chandeliers and silk gloves behind, chasing something raw, something real, and right now, in the storm's fury, she saw it in Jonah Tate's weathered face and the way he shielded his daughters from the rain. "You don't know me, ma'am," Jonah said, his voice rough as the gravel under his boots. Rain streamed from his hat, pooling in the hollows of his cheeks. Maisie, barely 6, coughed a deep, wet rattle that cut Clara like a knife. Nora, 8 and fierce, clung to her father's hand, her eyes darting to the carriage's chimney, where a thin wisp of smoke promised warmth. Clara stepped closer, her boots sinking into the mud. "I know enough," she said. "You're Jonah Tate, and those girls need a fire. Get in, or I'll carry them myself." The crowd under the saloon's awning gasped, their whispers drowned by the storm. A woman didn't speak like that in Redstone Creek, not to a man, not in public. But Clara wasn't here for their rules. She'd grown up in a world of wealth and whispers, where value was measured in gold, not grit. She'd run west to escape it, and she wasn't about to let a town's judgment stop her now. Jonah's pride battled his desperation. Maisie's cough grew worse, and Nora tugged his sleeve. "Pa, please, it's warm in there." Thunder cracked, shaking the ground, and Jonah's resolve broke. He scooped Maisie into his arms, took Nora's hand, and followed Clara through the rain. The carriage door creaked open, revealing a world that didn't belong in Redstone. A small iron stove glowing red, a loaf of sourdough on a wooden table, the faint scent of rosemary and clean wool. It wasn't just a carriage, it was a lifeline. Inside, Clara knelt by the stove, stirring a pot of beef broth that filled the air with comfort. She handed Jonah a thick wool blanket without looking at him. "Wrap them up. They're freezing." He obeyed, his calloused hands trembling as he draped the blanket over Maisie and Nora, who huddled together like frightened sparrows. Clara ladled broth into tin cups, her movements steady, but her eyes unreadable. "I'm Clara Hensley," she said, passing the cups to the girls. "Came to marry Amos Reed. Found his grave instead. Seems the West had other plans for me." Jonah sat on the floor, holding Maisie close. "You heard about me at the saloon, didn't you? They call me cursed." Clara met his gaze, unflinching. "They're wrong. Curses don't hold their daughters through a storm." She handed him a cup. "Drink. Then tell me why you're sleeping in a barn with 2 kids in weather like this." Jonah sipped the broth, its warmth sinking into his bones. His voice came low, heavy with shame. "Silas Morrow, the banker, offered me a loan to grow my forge. Said it'd make us rich. Instead, he took my land, my shop, everything. After Leela died, I stopped fighting." Clara leaned against the carriage wall, arms crossed. "You didn't stop. You're still here." Holding those girls like they're all that matters, that's fight enough. She tucked a quilt around Nora, her touch gentle but sure. Names don't break, Jonah. You're more than what they stole. That night, the girls slept on the narrow bunk, curled under a patchwork quilt. Clara sat in the driver's seat, her cloak pulled tight, eyes scanning the rain-lashed street. Jonah lay on the floor, staring at the wooden ceiling, his heart caught between gratitude and fear. This woman, this stranger, had given him shelter, but what did she want in return? What was Clara hiding behind her steady gaze? And why had she chosen a broken man and his daughters to pull from the storm? The storm had passed, but Redstone Creek still hummed with whispers. By morning, the muddy streets glistened under a weak sun, and Clara Hensley's carriage stood like a beacon on the edge of town. Inside, Jonah Tate sat on the floor, watching. His daughters, Maisie and Nora, sleep soundly on the bunk, their faces soft for the first time in months. The warmth of Clara's broth still lingered in his chest, but so did a gnawing question. Why had this stranger opened her door to a man like him? Clara was already up, her sleeves rolled as she stoked the stove's fire. Her movements were precise, like a woman who'd learned to make every action count. She didn't glance at Jonah, but her voice cut through the quiet. You're awake. Good. We've got work to do. Work. Jonah's brow furrowed. Ma'am, I'm grateful, but I ain't got nothing to offer you. No money, no trade. Just me and my girls. Clara turned, her green eyes sharp as flint. You've got hands, Jonah, and a heart that hasn't quit. That's enough for now. She handed him a broom. Start by sweeping the floor. Then we'll talk about what's next. Jonah hesitated, pride prickling like a burr under his skin. He'd been a blacksmith, not a housekeeper. But Maisie stirred, her cough softer now, and Nora mumbled something about fresh bread. He took the broom. For them, he'd sweep 1,000 floors outside. Redstone Creek was waking up, and the town had already made Clara its favorite gossip. She took in Jonah Tate, the saloon keeper muttered to the barber, him and his filthy girls, right into her fancy carriage. The preacher's wife, Mrs. Hargrove, pursed her lips. She's either a saint or a fool, maybe both. But Clara didn't care about their tongues. She'd heard worse in Boston's drawing rooms, where smiles hid sharper knives. By noon, she'd set Nora to folding blankets and Maisie to sorting a small tin of Button's busy work to keep their hands steady and their minds off the cold world outside. Jonah swept, then scrubbed the carriage's tiny table until it gleamed. Clara watched him, noting the way his shoulders squared when he worked, like a man remembering who he used to be. She stepped outside to fetch water, only to find a small crowd lingering near the general store. Silas Morrow, the banker who'd ruined Jonah, stood among them, his mustache twitching like a cat's whiskers. He tipped his hat, his smile all teeth. Miss Hensley, he called, loud enough for the crowd to hear. You've got a kind heart, taking in strays. But Redstone ain't a place for charity cases. You'd do well to remember that. Clara set the bucket down, her voice calm but cold as a winter stream. I remember what I need to. Mr. Morrow, like the name of a man who'd trick a widower out of his livelihood. The crowd stilled. Silas's smile faltered, but he recovered. Fast. Careful, ma'am. You're new here. Don't make enemies before you've made friends. She didn't flinch. I choose my friends carefully, and my enemies even more so. She turned her back on him, bucket in hand, and walked away. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, their whispers trailing her like smoke. Back in the carriage, Jonah had stopped sweeping. He'd heard every word through the open window. You shouldn't have done that, he said, his voice low. Silas ain't just a banker. He owns half this town. He'll make trouble for you. Clara poured water into a kettle, her hands steady. Let him try. I didn't come to Montana to bow to men like him. She glanced at the girls, now giggling over a mismatched button shaped like a star. Besides, I'm not here for me. I'm here for them. Jonah's throat tightened. Why ask Clara? You could have walked away. Why pick a man who's got nothing but ghosts? She set the kettle on the stove, her gaze distant. Because I know what it's like to lose everything that matters, and I know what it's like to keep fighting anyway. She didn't elaborate, and Jonah didn't push. But her words hung heavy. like a secret too big for the tiny carriage. That afternoon, Clara pulled a small crate from under the bunk. Inside were skeins of wool, a needle, and thread. She handed them to Nora. "You ever mend a sock?" Nora shook her head, eyes wide. Clara smiled, the first real smile Jonah had seen. "Time to learn. Then, we'll make these clothes fit you proper." She turned to Jonah. "And you, there's a broken hinge on the door. Fix it. You're a blacksmith, aren't you?" Jonah blinked, then nodded. For the first time in years, someone had called him by his trade, not his shame. He found a small hammer and nails in Clara's crate and set to work. The rhythm of the hammer felt like coming home. Maisie clapped, delighted by the sound, and Nora threaded her needle with a focus that made Jonah's chest ache with pride. By evening, the carriage smelled of fresh bread and mending wax. Clara had traded a loaf for a bar of soap at the general store, and she'd bribed the storekeeper's son to teach Nora her letters after supper. The girls were clean, fed, and laughing, a sound Jonah hadn't heard since Lila's voice filled their old cabin. He watched Clara, her hands moving with purpose, her face unreadable but kind. She was a puzzle, this woman, and every piece he glimpsed made him want to know more. But as night fell, a shadow crossed his mind. Silas Morrow's warning wasn't idle. Men like him didn't let slights go unpunished, and Clara had just painted a target on her back. Jonah glanced at his girls, sleeping soundly, and then at Clara, humming softly as she darned a sock. He'd stepped into her world, but at what cost? What price would Clara pay for defying Silas Morrow? And what hidden strength was she keeping locked away? The sun rose over Redstone Creek, painting the mountains gold, but the air in town was thick with tension. Clara Hensley's carriage had become a quiet rebellion, a symbol that defied the unspoken rules of a town that thrived on keeping people in their place. Inside, Jonah Tate worked with a purpose he hadn't felt in years, hammering nails into a loose carriage board while Maisie and Nora sorted wildflowers they'd picked from the hillside. Clara knelt beside them, teaching them to braid the stems into crowns, her laughter soft but bright enough to cut through the morning chill. For a moment, it felt like a home, but in Redstone Creek, peace was a fragile thing, and Silas Morrow was already sharpening his claws. Word of Clara's defiance in front of the general store had spread like wildfire. By midday, the townsfolk's whispers had turned into stares. The blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Callahan, muttered to the seamstress, "She's trouble, that Clara. Talking to Silas like that, she'll learn." The saloon keeper smirked, "Bet she's gone by week's end." But Clara didn't flinch. She'd faced sharper tongues in Boston's high society, where every compliment hit a barb. She kept her chin high, trading bread for candles at the store and teaching Nora to write her name in the dirt with a stick. Jonah watched her, marveling at her steadiness, but his gut churned with worry. He knew Silas Morrow didn't forgive slights, he punished them. That afternoon, trouble arrived in the form of a folded notice nailed to the carriage door. Jonah pulled it down, his hands unsteady. "It's from the town council," he said, voice tight. "They're calling a meeting tomorrow. Says you're harboring vagrants, meaning me and the girls. They want us out." Clara read the notice, her face unreadable. "Vagrants," she said softly, as if tasting the word. Funny how a man who lost everything to a liar gets called the problem. She crumpled the paper and tossed it into the stove, where it curled into ash. "Let them talk. They don't decide who stays." Jonah's jaw clenched. "Clara, this ain't just talk. Silas runs that council. He'll turn the whole town against you. I've seen him do it before." His voice dropped, heavy with guilt. "You don't deserve this. You took us in, and now you're paying for it." She turned to him, her eyes fierce. "I chose this, Jonah. I chose you and those girls. I'm not afraid of a man in a fancy suit." She paused, softening. "But I need you to stop acting like you're the one who's got to carry all the weight. We're in this together now." Jonah didn't know how to answer. He wasn't used to someone standing beside him, let alone in front of him. But before he could speak, Nora ran up, holding a flower crown. "Miss Clara, look, it's for you." Clara knelt, letting Nora place it on her head. The sight Clara with wildflowers in her hair, smiling at his daughter, made Jonah's heart ache with something he hadn't felt since Leela. Hope. Dangerous, reckless hope. That evening, Clara took the girls to the creek to wash clothes, her laughter echoing as she splashed water at Nora. Jonah stayed behind, fixing a loose wheel on the carriage. The work felt good, like reclaiming a piece of himself. But as he tightened a bolt, a shadow fell across him. Silas Morrow stood there, his polished boots out of place in the mud. Two men flanked him, their eyes hard and hands resting on their belts. Evening, Tate, Silas said, his voice smooth as oil. Heard your playing house in that fancy carriage. Mighty kind of Miss Hensley, but it's causing a stir. Folks don't like strangers stirring up trouble. Jonah stood, wiping his hands on his shirt. We ain't troubling no one. Leave her be, Silas. Silas chuckled, but his eyes were cold. You're a walking reminder of failure, Jonah, and now you've got that woman tangled in your mess. Tell her to move on, or I'll make sure the council does more than write notes. He leaned closer. I can make life real hard for those girls of yours. Jonah's fists clenched, but he held back. Silas wanted a fight, a reason to drag him through the mud again. You stay away from my family, he said, voice low and steady. Silas smirked and walked away, his men trailing like wolves. Jonah's heart pounded, rage mixing with fear. He'd fought to keep his girls safe, but Silas was a different kind of enemy, one who didn't need fists to destroy. When Clara returned with the girls, Jonah told her everything. She listened, her face calm but her eyes burning. He thinks he can scare us out, she said, hanging a damp shirt to dry. He's wrong. She pulled a small leather pouch from her trunk, its contents clinking softly. I've got resources. Jonah, more than he knows, and I'm not running. Jonah stared at the pouch, then at her. What are you, Clara? No mail-order bride carries a carriage like this or talks like you do. What's your story? Clara's smile was small, secretive. I'm just a woman who's tired of losing, Jonah. Same as you. She turned to Maisie, who was coughing again, and handed her a small vial of honey and herbs. Drink this, sweetheart. It'll help. Her tenderness with the girls was real, but Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that Clara was holding something back, something big. As night fell, the carriage glowed with lamplight, a tiny fortress against the darkening town. Clara taught Nora to read a line from an old book of poetry, while Jonah carved a wooden spoon, his hands finding a rhythm he'd thought was lost. But outside, Redstone Creek was stirring, and Silas Morrow was already plotting his next move. What was Clara hiding in that leather pouch? And how far would Silas go to break the family she'd chosen to fight for? Redstone Creek buzzed with a restless energy, like the hum of a beehive before a storm. Clara Hensley's carriage, parked boldly on the town's edge, had become a silent challenge to Silas Morrow's grip on the valley. Inside, Jonah Tate sat, carving a wooden horse for Maisie, the rhythmic scrape of his knife a small rebellion against the despair that once defined him. His daughters, Maisie and Nora, sat nearby, giggling as Clara showed them how to stitch patches onto their worn dresses. Pull the thread tight, Nora, Clara said, her voice steady as a heartbeat. Show the world you're stronger than it thinks. But outside, the town was closing in, and Silas's threat hung heavy, like smoke from a smoldering fire. The council's notice, nailed to the carriage door the day before, still burned in Jonah's mind. Vagrants, it called them him, and his girls, as if they were less than the dust on Redstone streets. Clara had burned the paper in the stove, but Jonah knew Silas wouldn't stop at words. The banker owned half the town's deeds and all its fear. Clara, Jonah said, setting the carving down, this fight's gonna cost you. Me and the girls can leave. You don't need our burden. Clara's green eyes met his, sharp and unyielding. You think I'd let you walk back into the cold? I pulled you out of that storm, Jonah, and I'm not running from this one. She stood, brushing her hands on her apron. We faced them together, that's the deal. Before Jonah could reply, a sharp knock rattled the door. Mrs. Hargrove, the preacher's wife, stood outside, her face tight with worry. Miss Hensley, she said, clutching her shawl against the evening chill. Silas is stirring up trouble. Says you're endangering those girls, causing unrest. The council meets tonight, and he's got folks riled up. Clara handed her a jar of salve for her husband's aching knee. Let Silas talk, she said, her voice cool as a mountain stream. "Truth doesn't bend to his lies." Mrs. Hargrove took the jar, her eyes darting nervously, then hurried off, as if Clara's defiance might rub off on her by dusk. The town hall, a weathered building with creaking beams and a sagging roof, was packed with Redstone's citizens. Lanterns cast flickering shadows, and the air smelled of tobacco and sweat. Silas Morrow stood at the front, his suit pristine, his voice smooth as snake oil. "Miss Hensley's actions threaten our town's order," he said, "harboring a man with no means, no home, and 2 children who need proper care. It's reckless. I propose we place the girls with a respectable family until a better solution is found." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Some nodded, swayed by Silas's authority. Others shifted, uneasy. Jonah's fists clenched, his heart pounding with the urge to fight. But Clara stepped forward, her presence commanding the room. "Respectable," she said, her voice clear and cutting. "You mean families who'd turn away a father fighting for his own? I've fed Maisie and Nora, clothed them, given them warmth when this town gave them nothing. And you, Mr. Morrow, what have you given, besides stealing a man's livelihood?" The crowd gasped, whispers rising like a wind. Silas's smile tightened, but he pressed on. "Bold words, Miss Hensley, but you're a stranger here, no ties, no standing, and I've asked the sheriff to investigate your questionable background." He waved a document, signed by 10 citizens. "This petition demands the girls' removal for their safety." Clara didn't flinch. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a sealed envelope, its edges worn, but its weight undeniable. "You want to talk backgrounds, Mr. Morrow? Let's talk yours. Secret land deals, profits skimmed from struggling ranchers. I've got names, dates, signatures." She held it up, her voice steady as steel. "Care to explain to these good people?" The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Silas's face paled, his hand twitching toward the envelope. The council head, old rancher Baxter, slammed his gavel. "Order, we'll review this tomorrow." Meeting adjourned. Outside, under a sky streaked with fading light, Jonah grabbed Clara's arm. "What's in that envelope, Clara? And how do you know about Silas's deals?" She pulled away, her eyes guarded but fierce. "I've got my ways, Jonah. Trust me, it's enough." They walked back to the carriage, where Maisie and Nora ran to them, their small arms wrapping around Clara's waist. Jonah watched, his heart caught between gratitude and dread. Clara was fighting a war for them, but every war had a price, and her secrets felt like a storm waiting to break. What power did Clara hold in that envelope, and would it be enough to stop Silas Morrow's schemes? The dawn broke over Redstone Creek, casting a pale light on Clara Hensley's carriage, its black frame standing resolute against the town's whispers. Inside, Jonah Tate sat with Maisie on his lap, her cough quieter now, thanks to Clara's herbal remedies. Nora traced letters in a small book Clara had given her, her brow furrowed with focus. The warmth of the carriage felt like a fragile shield against the storm brewing outside. A storm named Silas Morrow. Today was the council's final meeting, and Jonah knew it wasn't just his daughter's future at stake. It was Clara's. Clara moved with quiet purpose, packing a small satchel with the mysterious envelope from the night before. Her face was calm, but Jonah caught the tension in her hands, the way her fingers lingered on the satchel's clasp. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice low. "Silas plays dirty. If that envelope doesn't stop him, he'll come for you harder." Clara met his gaze, her green eyes steady, but burning with something fierce. "I've faced men like him before, Jonah. They think money buys power, but it doesn't buy truth." She knelt by Maisie, brushing a strand of hair from the girl's face. "We're fighting for your girls. That's worth any risk." Jonah's chest tightened. He wasn't used to someone standing in the line of fire for him, let alone for his daughters. But Clara's resolve was a flame he couldn't ignore, and it lit something in him, a spark of the man he'd been before loss and betrayal dimmed his fire. By mid-morning, the town hall was a cauldron of tension. Lanterns flickered, casting jagged shadows on the wooden walls. The crowd was larger than the night before, drawn by rumors of Clara's challenge to Silas Morrow. The banker stood at the front, his suit impeccable, his smile a blade. "Miss Hensley," he began, voice dripping with false concern. Your intentions may be noble, but you're unfit to care for those children. No home, no kin, and questions about your past that demand answers. He held up his petition, now with 15 signatures. This town agrees the Tate girls need a stable home, not a vagabond's carriage. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jonah's hands clenched, his heart pounding with the urge to lunge at Silas. But Clara stepped forward, her presence silencing the room. "Stable," she said, her voice clear as a gunshot. "You speak of stability, Mr. Morrow, while you've built your empire on stolen dreams. You took Jonah's forge, his land, his hope, and now you want his daughters?" She pulled the envelope from her satchel, holding it high. "This contains proof of your scheme's land deals that cheated half this town. Shall I read the names?" The crowd gasped, heads turning. Silas's face twitched, but he forced a laugh. "Empty threats. Miss Hensley, you're a stranger with no standing, and I've got a witness who says you're not what you seem." He nodded to a man in the back, a weary figure in a dusty coat, his eyes darting nervously. "Mr. Crane, tell them." Crane shuffled forward, avoiding Clara's gaze. "I worked for a lawyer in Boston," he said, voice shaky. "Heard of a Clara Hensley. Ran from a rich family, left debts behind. She ain't no saint, she's hiding something." The room erupted in whispers. Jonah's heart sank, his eyes searching Clara's face. She didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened on the envelope. "Hiding," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I left Boston because I refused to live a lie. But you, Mr. Morrow, you've built your life on them." She opened the envelope, pulling out a sheaf of papers. "These are contracts, signed by you, siphoning land from ranchers like Tom Callahan and widows like Mrs. Ellis. You forged signatures, bribed officials. I've got witnesses, 2 men you thought you'd silenced." The crowd roared, some shouting in anger, others in disbelief. Silas's composure cracked, his eyes darting to the papers. "Lies," he snapped, but his voice wavered. The council head, Baxter, banged his gavel. "Order. Miss Hensley, present your evidence now, or we move to a vote." Clara stepped to the front, laying the papers on the table. "Read them," she said. "Every page tells a story of greed." Baxter's eyes widened as he scanned the documents, his face paling. The crowd leaned forward, hungry for truth. Jonah watched, his heart torn between pride and fear. Clara was dismantling Silas's empire, but at what cost? Crane's words about her past lingered, and Jonah wondered what else she hadn't told him. As the council adjourned to review the evidence, Clara and Jonah walked back to the carriage. Maisie and Nora ran to them, their laughter a brief reprieve from the tension. But Jonah couldn't shake his unease. "Clara," he said, stopping her outside the carriage. "What Crane said, is it true? Are you running from something?" Clara's face softened, but her eyes held a shadow. "I ran from a life that wasn't mine, Jonah. That's all you need to know for now." She touched his arm, her voice gentle. "Trust me, I'm here for you and the girls." Jonah nodded, but doubt gnawed at him. Clara was a fire burning, bright and fierce, but fires could consume as much as they warmed. As they stepped into the carriage, the lamplight cast their shadows long, and Jonah felt the weight of the truth still unspoken. What secrets from Clara's past were chasing her? And would her fight against Silas save the family or tear it apart? The morning sun barely pierced the heavy clouds over Redstone Creek, casting a gray pallor over the town. Clara Hensley's carriage stood like a lone sentinel, its black frame unyielding despite the storm of suspicion brewing around it. Inside, Jonah Tate sat whittling a small wooden bird for Nora, his hands steady, but his heart racing. The council's decision loomed, and Clara's envelope of secrets had shaken Redstone to its core. Maisie hummed softly, playing with a braided flower crown while Nora practiced her letters, her pencil scratching against a scrap of paper. Clara stood by the stove, stirring a pot of oatmeal, her face calm, but her eyes distant, as if she were bracing for a battle only she could see. Jonah set the carving down, his voice low. "Clara, that envelope, what you said about Silas, it's got the town split. Some folks are with us, but others, they're scared. If this goes wrong today, they'll take the girls." Clara turned, her green eyes fierce. "They won't take them, Jonah. Not while I'm breathing. She reached for her satchel, checking the envelope tucked inside. Silas thinks he's untouchable, but he's wrong. Those papers are just the start. Jonah's brow furrowed. What else you got on him? And what's this about Boston, Clara? That man, Crane, said you ran from debts. I need to know who you are. Her hand paused, and for a moment, her guard slipped, revealing a flicker of pain. I'm someone who's done running, she said softly. Trust me. Jonah, for now, that's enough. She knelt by Maisie, spooning oatmeal into a bowl. Eat up, sweetheart. We've got a big day. Jonah wanted to push, but the trust in his daughter's eyes stopped him. Clara had given them more than food and shelter she'd given them. Hope, and he couldn't tear that away. Still, Crane's words gnawed at him, and the weight of her secrets felt heavier with every passing hour. By noon, the town hall was a tinderbox. The crowd spilled out the doors, their voices a low hum of excitement and fear. Silas Morrow stood at the front, his suit crisp, but his eyes bloodshot, as if he hadn't slept. The council head, Baxter, held Clara's papers, his face grim. Miss Hensley, he began. You've made serious accusations against Mr. Morrow. Forged deeds, stolen land. These are grave claims. We've reviewed your evidence, and it's compelling. But Mr. Morrow has a right to respond. Silas stepped forward, his smile tight. Miss Hensley's papers are fabrications, a desperate attempt to deflect from her own questionable character. She's a runaway, a woman with no ties, dragging these children into her schemes. He gestured to Crane, the nervous man from Boston, who stood twisting his hat. Tell them again. Crane cleared his throat. Clara Hensley left. Boston owing money to powerful folks. Her family disowned her. She's no savior, she's trouble. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others frowning. Jonah's heart sank, but Clara didn't waver. She stood, her voice cutting through the noise. Trouble? I'm the one exposing your crimes, Silas. Those papers aren't lies, they're signed by men you cheated, men too scared to speak until now. She turned to the crowd. Tom Callahan, your ranch deed was forged. Mrs. Ellis, your husband's land was sold out from under you. I've got their signatures, and they're ready to testify. A gasp rippled through the room. Tom Callahan stood, his face red. She's right. Silas took my land with a fake contract. Mrs. Ellis nodded, tears in her eyes. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, angrier. Silas's composure cracked, his voice rising. This is slander. You've got no proof. Clara held up a second document, this one sealed with red wax. This is a letter from a federal marshal in Helena. He's been tracking your deals, Silas. He's coming to Redstone tomorrow. The room exploded in shouts. Silas lunged for the letter, but Baxter slammed his gavel. Enough. The council will vote now. The Tate children stay with their father and Miss Hensley, pending further investigation into Mr. Morrow's affairs. The crowd roared, some cheering, others cursing. Jonah grabbed Clara's hand, his voice thick. You did it. You saved them. Clara's smile was faint, strained. Not yet, Jonah. Silas won't stop here. As they left the hall, the air felt electric, charged with victory and danger. Back at the carriage, Maisie and Nora ran to them, their laughter a bright spark in the gloom. But as Jonah tucked them into the bunk that night, he noticed Clara's hands trembling as she locked her satchel. She was a fortress, but even fortresses had cracks. Later, under the dim glow of the lantern, Jonah sat beside her. Clara, that letter from the marshal, is it real? Her silence was answer enough. What are you risking for us? He pressed. She looked at him, her eyes soft but guarded. Everything I've got, Jonah, just like you. Her words were a vow, but they carried a weight that made Jonah's heart ache. Outside, the wind howled, and the shadow of Silas's wrath loomed larger than ever. What was Clara risking with her secrets? And what would Silas do to reclaim his power? The night hung heavy over Redstone Creek, the stars hidden behind a veil of clouds. Clara Hensley's carriage glowed faintly, its lantern casting a warm circle against the darkness. Inside, Jonah Tate sat with Maisie and Nora, reading them a story from Clara's old poetry book, his voice steady despite the storm brewing in his heart. Clara's victory at the council had bought them time, But Silas Morrow's silence was louder than any threat. Jonah knew men like Silas didn't retreat, they struck back, harder and meaner. Clara sat by the stove, her satchel clutched close, the mysterious envelope and letter from the marshal tucked inside. Her face was calm, but Jonah saw the tension in her shoulders, like a bowstring pulled taut. "Clara," Jonah said, closing the book as the girls drifted to sleep. "That letter from the marshal, why didn't you tell me it wasn't real?" Her silence at the hall had confirmed his suspicions. "You're playing a dangerous game. Silas won't let this slide." Clara's eyes met his, sharp but weary. "I didn't lie, Jonah. The marshal's real. I sent a telegram to Helena before I came here, asking for an investigation into Silas's deals. But the letter, it's a bluff. I needed to shake him." She leaned forward, her voice low. "He's scared now, and scared men make mistakes." Jonah's jaw tightened. "And if he calls your bluff, he'll come for you, for us. I can't lose my girls, Clara." She reached out, her hand resting on his. "You won't, I swear it." Her touch was warm, grounding. But Jonah couldn't shake the feeling that her promises carried a price she hadn't named. By morning, Redstone Creek was a powder keg. The council's decision to keep Maisie and Nora with Jonah and Clara had split the town. Some, like Tom Callahan and Mrs. Ellis, stood by Clara, their faith bolstered by her evidence against Silas. Others, loyal to the banker's money, whispered poison. "She's a fraud," they said, "a runaway stirring up trouble." But Clara didn't hide. She walked to the general store, trading a loaf of bread for a sack of flour, her head high despite the stares. Jonah followed, carrying Nora on his shoulders, Maisie skipping beside him. For a moment, they looked like a family, fragile, but real. Then trouble came. As they returned to the carriage, they found the door ajar, the lock splintered. Inside, the bunk was torn apart, blankets shredded, and Clara's poetry book lay in pieces. A single word was scratched into the table. "Leave," Maisie whimpered, clutching Jonah's leg. Nora's eyes blazed. "Who did this, Pa?" Jonah's blood boiled, but Clara's voice cut through. "Silas," she said, her tone cold as iron. She knelt, picking up a torn page, her fingers trembling. "He's trying to scare us out." She looked at Jonah, her eyes fierce. "He won't." Jonah grabbed a hammer, ready to fix the lock, but Clara stopped him. "We don't hide, Jonah. We fight." She pulled a small tin from her satchel, filled with coins and a folded paper deed. Jonah realized, for a plot of land on the edge of town. "I bought this before I came," she said. "It's ours legally. Silas can't touch it." Jonah stared, stunned. "You've got land. Why didn't you say so?" Clara's smile was faint. "I was waiting for the right moment. Now's the time." She turned to the girls. "We're building a home right here. No more running." But Silas wasn't done. That afternoon, a crowd gathered near the carriage, led by Crane, the man from Boston. He held a telegram, his voice smug. "This is from Clara Hensley's family. Says she stole money and ran. She's a thief, not a savior." The crowd murmured, some shouting for Clara to leave. Jonah stepped forward, his voice a growl. "Enough. You don't know her. She's done more for this town than any of you." Clara touched his arm, stopping him. "Let me." She faced Crane, her voice steady. "My family disowned me because I wouldn't marry a man I didn't love. I took nothing but what was mine. You want proof? Check the bank in Helena. My name's on every dollar." She turned to the crowd. "Silas sent this man to scare you, to keep you under his thumb. Are you going to let him?" The crowd wavered, some stepping back, others nodding. Tom Callahan shouted, "She's right. Silas cheated me out of my land." Mrs. Ellis joined in, her voice shaking but firm. The tide was turning, but Crane smirked, slipping away into the crowd. That night, as Jonah repaired the carriage door, Clara sat with the girls, reading them a new story from a salvaged page. But the air felt heavy, and Jonah's heart raced. Silas's attack on the carriage was a warning, and Crane's telegram was a blade aimed at Clara's past. She was fighting for them, but her secrets were unraveling, and Jonah feared the truth might break them all. As Clara tucked the girls into bed, Jonah noticed a small locket fall from her satchel, engraved with a name, Clara Reed Amos. Reed's name, the man she was meant to marry. His heart stopped. Was Clara connected to Amos beyond a mail-order promise? And if so, what did she know about Silas that she wasn't telling? Who was Clara Reed? And what truth about Silas was she hiding that could change everything? The dawn broke cold over Redstone Creek, Montana, 1878. The mountains standing like silent witnesses to the battle about to unfold. Clara Hensley's carriage, battered but unbowed, glowed with the faint light of a lantern as Jonah Tate tucked Maisie and Nora into their bunk. The locket he'd found last night engraved with Clara Reed burned in his mind. A question he couldn't ask. Silas Morrow's attack on the carriage and Crane's accusations had left the town teetering on the edge of chaos. Today, a federal marshal was due to arrive, and Clara's bluff about Silas's crimes would either save them or doom them all. Jonah watched Clara as she packed her satchel, her hands steady but her eyes distant. "Clara," he said, voice low, "that locket, Clara Reed. You knew Amos Reed, didn't you? More than just a mail-order bride." Clara froze, then met his gaze, her green eyes raw with a truth she could no longer hide. "Amos was my brother," she whispered. "He wrote to me in Boston, begging me to come west, said Silas was stealing land, ruining lives. I came to help him, but he was dead when I arrived. I stayed for you. Jonah, for you and the girls." Her voice broke. "I couldn't save Amos, but I'll save you." Jonah's heart stopped. The plot twist hit like a thunderbolt. Clara wasn't a runaway heiress. She was a sister seeking justice, carrying her brother's fight against Silas Morrow. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick. "I didn't want you to carry my burden," she said. "But today we end this." She pulled the locket from her satchel, opening it to reveal a tiny photograph of Amos, his face eerily like hers. "This is my proof. Amos kept records of Silas's crimes. I sent them to the marshal before I left Boston." Before Jonah could respond, hoofbeats thundered outside. The federal marshal, a tall man with a weathered face, dismounted with 2 deputies. The town gathered, drawn by the clatter, as Silas Morrow appeared, his face pale but his smile defiant. "Miss Hensley," he sneered, "your bluff's over. No marshal's coming for me." Clara stepped forward, holding the locket and her envelope. "This isn't a bluff, Silas. This is justice." She handed the marshal her papers, her voice steady. "My brother, Amos Reed, documented your crimes, forged deeds, bribed officials, stolen land. These are his records and mine. You destroyed him, but you won't destroy this town." The marshal scanned the documents, his face hardening. "Mr. Morrow, you're under arrest for fraud and theft." The crowd gasped as the deputies seized Silas, his protests drowned by shouts of outrage and relief. Tom Callahan stepped forward, his voice booming. "She's right. He took my ranch." Mrs. Ellis joined in, tears streaming. "And my husband's land." The town, once divided, turned as one against Silas, their voices a roar of reckoning. But Silas wasn't done. As the deputies led him away, he twisted, his eyes wild. "You think this ends it, Clara? Your brother was a fool, and you're worse." He lunged, knocking a lantern from the carriage porch. Flames licked the dry wood, and the crowd screamed as fire spread, devouring the carriage. Clara's home, their sanctuary. Jonah grabbed Maisie and Nora, pulling them to safety. Clara dove into the flames, snatching her satchel and the locket. Before the roof collapsed, she stumbled out, coughing, her hands burned but clutching her brother's legacy. The carriage was gone, reduced to ash, but Clara stood tall, her face streaked with soot and defiance. Jonah pulled her close, his voice breaking. "You could have died, for you and the girls." "I'd do it again," she said, her eyes fierce. The crowd watched, silent, as the marshal hauled Silas away. Redstone Creek had changed in that moment, its heart cracked open by Clara's courage. Days later, the town came together. Tom Callahan brought timber, Mrs. Ellis nails. The blacksmith, once silent, hammered beams alongside Jonah. On the plot, Clara owned a new house, rose not a carriage, but a home built from the ashes of loss. Its walls were sturdy, its windows wide, and above the door, Nora carved a sign, "Tate Reed Home," built on love. At the first meal inside, Maisie said grace, Nora passed bread, and Jonah took Clara's hand, his voice steady. "I love you, Clara. Not because you saved us, but because you showed me I could save myself." Clara smiled, her eyes soft. "I loved you the moment I saw you in that storm, Jonah. You were already enough." The girls laughed, their voices filling the room, and for the first time, Redstone Creek felt like home. This story, set in the rugged Montana of 1878, reflects the spirit of the American West, where justice was hard-won and families were forged not just by blood but by choice. The land disputes Clara fought were real struggles in the 19th century, as settlers battled corrupt bankers and speculators to claim their place. If this tale of grit, love, and redemption moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories that remind us hope rises from the ashes. Tell us in the comments, what would you risk for the ones you love? Stay tuned, more tales of the heart are coming your way.